Hello, Little Justice leaders. I am so excited for the conversation we're having today. In case you don't know, I'm Shelby. I'm the creator of Little Justice Leaders. At Little Justice Leaders, we help educators, schools, and school leaders bring social justice to their students. And today we have some special guests with us to talk to us about how to do this work. So our guests, Dr. Vicki Hobson and Neely Minton, are experts on this topic. They have done incredible amounts of research and practice when it comes to specifically teaching hard history and thinking about how we bring justice into social studies. So, Dr. Hobson is an award-winning curriculum designer with over 17 years of experience in education and a specialization in culturally responsive resources. And Neely is a K-12 social studies coordinator for Albemarle County Schools outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And they have a goal of developing active and engaged justice-oriented citizens. They are both authors of a recent paper leveraging community partnerships to reframe the narrative in elementary social studies. And we're going to jump into the topic of hard history and critical inquiry. So, welcome, Vicki and Neely. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm excited for this conversation. So, can you start by just introducing yourselves to our community?
Sure. Neely, I'll go first. I'm Vicki Hobson. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm currently a assistant professor of elementary education at the University of Lynchburg. I teach 8 different classes, so I'm kind of a jack of all trades, but one of them is elementary social studies methods, which is kind of my love. And before that, I taught first, fourth, and fifth grades. I was an instructional coach. I was a coach with Neely. I was also an equity education specialist in Albemarle County Schools, where Neely and I got to collaborate and co-plan a year-long professional development, which is where the article came from. We've helped teachers design lots of curricular resources for our division that have since been shared out and are available on open OER platforms. So we're happy to talk more about that as well. But thank you for having me. I'm really passionate about elementary education and social justice oriented elementary education.
And I'm Neely Minton. I currently serve as K-12 Social Studies Coordinator for Albemarle County Schools, right outside Charlottesville, like you said, Shelby. And before that, I was actually Social Studies and World Languages Coordinator in Charlottesville City Schools. Prior to that, like Vicki said, I served as an instructional coach. We actually coached together, which was a great experience and where I got to know Vicki. So excited to be here with her today. And then before that, I was a high school. So I'm coming from a little bit of a different angle. I was a high school social studies teacher. I taught world history and U.S. history at Albemarle High School and Monticello High School. Like Vicki said, I collaborated to plan a year-long professional development experience and curricular experience called Reframing the Narrative for elementary educators. And right now I am tasked with the implementation of that curriculum and can definitely speak to both the development and the implementation. But I'm really passionate. I came into elementary social studies not knowing a whole lot, immersed myself within it, and learned a lot. And I've learned from people like Dr. Hobson. So I'm excited that she's here to talk about her elementary lens and experience. And I'm just thrilled to be able to have developed critical inquiry for elementary as a required component of our curriculum for all teachers to teach. So I look forward to talking about it.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm really excited. You are obviously bringing so much experience and wisdom to this conversation. So I'm excited for what we all will be able to learn. So we're talking about critical inquiry for teaching hard history. What does critical inquiry look like in the classroom?
I think really, and Neely, feel free to hop in whenever. I think it's important to kind of have a quick background on like what is inquiry, and then like let's fold critical on top of it. So we subscribe to like the inquiry design model, which is it's an instructional model that comes out of the C3 framework. So Virginia doesn't use that, but we helped our teachers learn how to use it. So it's like a national social studies framework. And basically, kind of in a nutshell, it's like we have compelling questions that students grapple with. There are sources that students analyze and evaluate that help build their disciplinary knowledge and skills. And then they answer this compelling question. And then there's also this element of taking informed action. And so, what does that look like with critical inquiry? All the same pieces are there, but the questions really aim at kind of like critiquing systems of power or bringing in counter narratives. The sources are from multiple perspectives and marginalized communities. And the informed action is really about alleviating injustice. So I think like that's how I would describe critical inquiry. And Neely, I'm sure you have more to add on.
Yes, I love how you described it, Vicki. That was a great kind of segue. It was a great kind of backup into what is inquiry and then the critical component on top. I would also add that something Vicki and I focused on a lot with our elementary educators, and I also focus on with secondary educators, is not just only examining oppression and systems of injustice, but we focus a lot on agency, excellence, joy, resistance to oppression. And that's something we looked carefully at as we designed our inquiries, as we learned for our year-long professional development experience. And as we're implementing the inquiries, we have something that we developed called the reframing tree. And it's just a picture of a tree. And there's words on either side of the tree. And on the right, it's like injustice, oppression, unfairness. And on the left, agency, excellence, humanity, identity, joy, resistance. And so we try to, within these critical inquiries, focus on both the left and the right side of the trees, and really prioritizing the left side, because if we know that we've learned that if we only focus on oppression narratives, we've done a disservice to communities who have been historically marginalized. So that's something that's really important to us within critical inquiry. It's not just hard history, it's whole truth history that also emphasizes agency.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that's so important when we're thinking about any kind of education rooted in justice is it has to also see the joy and the success and the achievement and the positive movement. So I love that. And thank you, Vicki, for breaking down critical inquiry. I think that's really important to kind of understand, the terms that we're using. So when it comes to approaching topics of hard history, why is critical inquiry kind of an approach that we should be using?
Well, one thing I like to say is, and I kind of borrowed this from politicians in our state, but one thing I like to say, and I do believe in this, is that we teach kids how to think, not what to think. By opening instruction with an inquiry question, with a compelling question, you're allowing students to draw their own conclusions and to construct their own knowledge and understandings, which is much more powerful and rigorous than just telling students, here's what happened, here's what you should think. We're curating sources carefully, so we're putting primary and secondary sources in front of students that will paint a whole truth historical perspective for kids and draw the through line from the past to the present so they can trace this issue over time. But I do believe that framing it around inquiry helps kids to be able to construct their own knowledge and understanding. And also it helps people to be on, it helps other stakeholders to get on board with teaching students, especially our youngest learners, whole truth history or hard history. I think it's just the right approach to make it happen.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I just think what's nice about kind of framing things with questions, kids come naturally curious to us. And I think school, by the time kids hit middle and high school, they've stopped asking all these questions. But like actually, I think inquiry and critical inquiry are like just it comes out of kids' mouths. Like why is that the way that is? Or I'm curious about X. And so it really just builds upon children's natural inclination to be curious about the world around them. And I think we as adults are the ones that teach students that there are certain taboo topics that we shouldn't talk about. And so this is just a way, and that's why it's not just something that teachers like wake up and do, right? I wasn't taught that way. We also know that teachers teach in the way they were taught. And so hard history can be hard. And the reason it's called hard history is that it's dealing with topics that are sometimes uncomfortable for the adults in the room that are teaching it. And for lots of people, they deal with things like violence or oppression or injustices or rights being taken away, right? And so, but these are all topics that we teach about in elementary school. Like you can't teach about Martin Luther King, like, why does he matter without actually understanding the context into what he was fighting for and why he was doing what he was doing? We're doing students a disservice if we don't actually explain the whole story, like Neely said, kind of help kids with that through line. So I think critical inquiry is really a beautiful fit for this age. And we actually worked with a developmental psychologist with our teachers. And she did some professional learning with them around K2 and 3-5 and kind of what they bring to the table, like their assets and kind of where they are developmentally, and that it's actually developmentally inappropriate to not talk about these things with them because they are ready. Like we know from science, like students start noticing race, what is it at 6 months,
Yeah,
Neely?
something early
So,
like
like
that.
she showed us all the research. So it was like really nice for our teachers to be like, oh, like I should do this. I'm supported by my school division and science to talk about these things. And so that's another thing is that I think it just really truly is developmentally appropriate too.
She also talked about how the pedagogy, and her name's Dr. Johari Harris. She's fantastic, but
Amazing.
Yeah.
she also talked about the pedagogy behind it. Like it is developmentally appropriate to teach through inquiry because you want to allow students, what's developmentally appropriate is allowing them to grapple with these questions themselves and have conversation,
Hmm.
discussion, and discourse with each other over these topics. And that if the teacher just, presents it as like this knowledge that is factual up front, the students don't get to do that grappling. And by doing the grappling, they actually come around to the side of justice through the conversations, even if they don't always start on that side. And she's done a lot of research to show that that's the case. It also, like, if you've ever read like Teaching to Transgress, it just decolonizes your own teaching practice to teach through inquiry and to allow students to construct their own knowledge and understandings. It's almost more important how we teach in a way than what we teach, I would say. What we teach is also important, really important, but how we teach, we don't want to teach. Sometimes people are comfortable with teaching hard history, but they do it in a way that is where the teacher is the holder of all of the knowledge. We don't want the teacher to be the holder of the knowledge. We want to share power with our students and have them construct their own ideas.
Yeah. Like democratic
Absolutely.
classrooms, right? It's hard. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
not how I
Yeah.
learned social studies. I actually talked in class today. What is your memory of social studies, right? K-12 with my own college students. And it's bad. Like they're like, we memorized a lot of stuff, right? We like spit out facts. And so I was like, yeah, right. So I'm going to teach you a different way and it's going to feel hard. And it is hard. And that's why like really being thoughtful about supporting teachers and administrators to know how to do this is really a part of our work, you know?
Absolutely. I think this so many good points, and so many of us can kind of reflect back on, our experience with history and social studies. And I had the same where I was memorizing facts, and I remember worksheets where it would just be like a fill in the blank date, like so and so did this on, you write in the date, and that was my high school history. And that's, the best I got. So I think we really do have to kind of reframe the conversation because so many of us are coming from a lens of just understanding how history is taught in such a different way. I also appreciate that you all brought up, developmental appropriateness. This is such a huge concern for so many folks in this conversation. So I love how you said, actually, it's developmentally inappropriate to not do this work, right? Because the students are, in fact, ready. So I love it. Can you tell us a little bit about the reframing the narrative work that you all did?
Sure. Neely, do you want me to give like a little of the backstory and then you can
Sure.
pop up?
Mhm.
So, we had a third author on our publication that just came out a couple of months ago or a month ago, which is my husband. And so he was the social studies coordinator before Neely. And he worked with James Madison's Montpelier and the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation to get a $300,000 grant to do this for secondary social studies. He was a secondary social studies teacher as well. And then so it was a 5-year grant. And about, what was it, like year 3 maybe into the grant,
Mhm.
COVID happened. And so a big part of our grant and our work is digging into local stories and local history and place-based learning to support developing teachers' knowledge and content knowledge of marginalized perspectives, to support them in teaching whole truth history. So with that, there was a lot of money left over because we weren't eating food or taking buses anywhere. So we ended up, Neely and I got $60,000 as part of that grant. And so elementary wasn't originally a part of it, and we were able to reallocate that money to elementary. And so that was really, really exciting. At that point in time, I was an equity education specialist in our school division. So I was charged with supporting the professional learning around culturally responsive teaching and anti-racism, our anti-racism policy. And Neely was the new social studies coordinator after my husband. And so we collaborated to then take on this project. And we reimagined it a little bit to make it more elementary friendly. So I'll let Neely was really working hard to plan this year-long experience. And again, we did it for a year because we know how important like ongoing professional learning is, because like a one and done isn't as effective as we know. So Neely, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of where we went with our
Sure. Yeah,
60
thanks.
grand?
Thanks for setting that up. That was great. You're really good at summing things up like just in a concise way. I appreciate that. And
Neely.
segueing into it. But yeah, we luckily, like Vicki talked about her husband, John, the previous social studies coordinator, I had worked with him when I was over in Charlottesville City Schools in a neighboring school division. So our teachers had participated with his secondary teachers to do that portion of it. And he set up such good structures for this year-long professional learning experience that I was able to kind of replicate those structures in the elementary experience. And like Vicki said, I and my other colleague who focuses on pre-K, we collaborated with Vicki and another equity specialist to develop this year-long experience for teachers. And we know that learning in a cohort model is really effective, that sustained learning over time. So, and we also know that it's really effective and helpful when you partner with community partners. So like Vicki mentioned, we have Montpelier as our primary partner, but we also partnered with some other local organizations that are really critical to this work. For us, especially embedding the local historical narratives into the work. We had the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. We partnered with the Valentine Museum in Richmond, Virginia. We partnered with the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and others, basically to just build teachers' capacity. So we kind of focused on a few different things. We focused on developmental science and developmental psychology, which Vicki referenced with Dr. Jahari Harris, who was another partner. So we focused on building teacher capacity around what is developmentally appropriate for kids. That was a big focus for us, which was super helpful. We focused on building up their content knowledge and their knowledge of just kind of teaching the both sides of the tree angle. And that was with the community partners that we brought in, like the Valentine Museum and Montpelier. We focused on having teachers explore exhibits at Montpelier that showed both sides of that reframing tree that I referenced. And then we focused on the pedagogy aspect. And we've been partnering with Dr. John Lee from C3 Teachers, and he taught us how to design inquiry, the components of inquiry, and helped us workshop inquiries along the way. And then, of course, Vicki and her colleague, Shay Carter Shiflett's involvement was really critical because they built teacher capacity around culturally responsive teaching, anti-racist, anti-bias teaching and practices. And so all of those kind of came together. We brought these teachers together several times throughout the year and had these really, intense sessions. And then we had teachers do a book study around a professional learning book on their own. And we kind of came up with prompts for them and protocols. And then we came back together at the end of the year when the summer first began, and we wrote our inquiries with the help of Dr. John Lee. So it was just a really cool experience. We then piloted those inquiries the year after. We had these teachers teach the inquiries that they had designed. And then the year after that, they became a required part of our curriculum in elementary social studies in our school division. And now all teachers are teaching these inquiries that were designed by this smaller group that included teachers from all of our elementary schools.
That is amazing. It sounds like, it was really interesting work for you all and has had such a huge impact. And I like that you kind of talked about all different angles, right? You're talking about what's happening in the classroom, but also the training and support that the adults in the system are getting to be able to make this happen. Because I think sometimes with this kind of work, we can jump into like, we're just going to do this new curriculum, or we're just going to have this one-off training. And I think, the comprehensive approach really helps everyone feel supported and like they have what they need to make it happen. So that's very, very cool. I'm sure we could talk about this project so much longer, but folks should go check out that recent paper. I'll link it below. But also, all of the things that you all have published. I'll put a number of links for everyone to check out. I know right now a lot of teachers are feeling that, especially those who don't have school board support like exists in your district, are feeling that it might be easier to just avoid hard history altogether, right? This is especially true in certain states where there's legislation that can be confusing and very scary for educators. So why should we as educators be confronting hard history head on right now?
So I know Neely and I both have a lot of thoughts about this. This is like Neely's whole job. It's like part of mine. But I would say, like, why do we do this, right? So teaching hard history, first of all, I've heard Neely say this, and this is what we say, but it's like you're teaching truthfully and accurately. And that's really important because it really avoids creating misconceptions with kids or having them internalize myths that can really, like, we've heard this from our fourth and fifth graders how harmful it is they feel like their teachers have lied to them. It's like lies of omission. But that can be really hard to undo. Like we watched a video at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center by Dr. What is her name, Neely, from Jamestown, Yorktown,
Oh,
Christy Coles. Um,
Christy Coleman.
Coleman. So
Dr.
she was like, okay, let's think about this. How many of y'all have heard that George Washington's teeth were made of wood? And like everybody has heard that. And she was like, that is not true. So we live in Charlottesville. Thomas Jefferson's home is in Charlottesville. He is like one of the most famous enslavers because he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but enslaved 609 humans. So like this idea of like, but the kids are like, but wasn't he like a nice enslaver? And you hear this all the time where we live. And so there's this myth or this misconception. And really, like what we've done in our curriculum is actually teach children George Washington's teeth were not wooden. They came from his enslaved people. That's what his dentures were made of. Like there's no such thing as being nice when you treat a human being as property. And so just like straight up saying it, let's not build this misconception, like let's just be honest. And so that's like, it feels heavy-handed, but it's also true. And when we have these fun little cutesy worksheets from Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers, we're not doing what's right for kids. And also like instead of shame and guilt, this type of history actually fosters empathy and perspective taking. And so we're not trying to make people feel guilty for something they did not do, right? Our 5-year-olds did not do this, but they deserve to know what is true and to have empathy so that then they can actually understand, like Neely said, how past and present relate to one another. And then they can be, they already are citizens and civic actors, but they can be informed civic actors moving forward. I just think it really, this type of work helps students kind of really engage richly in civic life now and in the future. So those are some of my like thoughts. I don't know, Neely, I'm sure you have other things to add.
That was fantastic, Vicki. Those are really interesting thoughts. I have a lot of the same thoughts that Vicki does. I would add too that I mean, one, I understand I can empathize with people's struggles right now with this and feeling the need to kind of, or feeling that it would be easier not to teach the truth, easier to leave out these stories out of the inquiry-based lessons that they're developing. But I would say, given that, I mean, everything a teacher does is a choice, right? So leaving out and leaving out important narratives that tell a whole truth picture of history, they don't you're making a choice of what you're not being neutral. So I would say like an omission of the truth is not neutrality. There is no such thing as neutrality. By omitting the whole picture of what happened in history, you're making a choice to kind of, like Vicki called it, an omission. It's a lie of omission. And that's why kids think that their teachers lied to them if when they learn the correct information and the full picture later. So you're making an active choice. Like, I think sometimes people think, I'm just going to be neutral. I'm just not going to mention that part. But you're actually making a choice to not tell the truth by doing that. And so we just really believe, because we've studied developmental science and developmental psychology, we know kids are ready for the truth. Our kindergartners, they can handle the truth as long as you're doing the truth, like you're conveying the truth in ways that are developmentally appropriate, which we've worked hard to do. They can learn the truth. That actually respects them as people. We take a whole child approach to education, and we want to respect all of our students, including our youngest learners. And so choosing to lie by omission does not respect them as learners. And we just, it's important to do that. I think one thing Vicki and I tried to point out in our article that you're linking in the video is on reframing the narrative, is that it's really important to engage with lots of stakeholders and to be super transparent about what you're doing. I have found sometimes that when people, I've had people complain to me about, I've had parents call and families and say, hey, what is this inquiry lesson my student was asked to do? I'm worried that you're quote unquote teaching critical race theory or something like that. And what I have realized in these conversations is that it's important to lean into the conversation. It's important to hear what the person's saying. And a lot of times, once we talk about what we're actually doing, which is teaching agency, excellence, joy, resistance, in addition to oppression and injustice, people start to understand what you're doing and they actually get on board with it. I had a lady change her whole tune in a conversation. She's like, I'm worried that you're indoctrinating, I'm worried you're indoctrinating students through this curriculum. By the end of the conversation, she's like, y'all are doing some good stuff in your county. I need to tell your boss how good this work is. And I think that I think we can all get behind, if we put partisan politics behind, like aside, it doesn't matter what your political leanings are. We can all get behind teaching the whole truth through inquiry. That should not be controversial. That's something that we want all students to be able to do. It's rigorous, it's relevant, it's authentic, and it helps develop more empathetic humans. And why would we not want to do that? That's kind of where I am, is don't be on the defense about it. Be an active listener, be an active communicator, but realize you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something wrong if you don't do it.
Absolutely. And I love that example, Neely, of the conversation you had with a caregiver, because it just goes to show how much, power and potential influence we have as educators to educate, right? To do the thing that we're supposed to do, which includes educating families in the community, right? Outside of our classroom. And for those teachers who are able to do this work, which I'll, recognize that some really are in positions that they cannot. But if you are in a position where you can and you can push the envelope, even if you're facing a little bit of pushback, there's so much potential power to really change the way people think and see and talk about these issues and engage in, genuine conversation and learning from and with each other. So that is one area of pushback. I imagine folks will get, some teachers are getting a lot of pushback from families or administrators. I think another area of challenge that I can imagine teachers may have in this work is around the critical inquiry and thinking about, for those educators with really scripted curriculum or very kind of rigorous pedagogy expectations at their schools. Do you have suggestions for how they can implement this work?
That's a really good question. We in Virginia, we just had a law passed where all of our literacy curriculum is now basically scripted for elementary schools. There's like 5 possible resources that you can choose from that are approved by the state, right? So thinking about integrating social studies and literacy has had to completely shift, like on a dime. And so we're dealing with that too. And so I do think one thing that is kind of interesting is that there are very few like elementary social studies curricula out there. Like it's not very, there's not that much. Like there, it does exist, but it's sometimes it's textbooks. And so if you have a textbook, like it's really easy. You can actually use the textbook as a source in an inquiry. We've done that. When I was teaching 5th grade and helping students kind of understand sharecropping, one of the things that we did was just look at an image and analyze an image, a photograph of a sharecropping family, and students didn't realize that those folks were in name not enslaved anymore, right? And so, how do we use the image out of our textbook to then kind of critically analyze and have those kinds of conversations? So if you have a scripted curriculum, sometimes you can do things where you like actually take a more critical stance of it, or use it and then pull in resources that have multiple perspectives, right? So if you have to use this textbook, but then you can pull in images, songs, all kinds of different things like trade books, picture books, to help tell stories. So that's one thing I would do is like, okay, like if you can't get rid of it, like, do you have the power to augment or be more critical of it or with it? So that's something that I think about. I don't know, Neely, do you have any other thoughts?
I was going to say we do have, like Vicki said, we have this a similar kind of challenge in English language arts, ELA, in elementary school with a scripted curriculum, like Vicki's talking about. And one thing, one challenge we actually do have in elementary social studies as well is because the scripted curriculum in ELA is so time consuming, that can kind of infringe on time to teach social studies and science and content. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And so one thing Vicki and I are actually working on that I'm really excited about is something called a trade book inquiry. And so like a lot of the inquiries that we develop through Reframing the Narrative that are part of our guarantee curriculum, they're longer inquiries that might, last a week or two for students in K-5. But these trade book inquiries are these 2-day inquiries. This format kind of just came out in social studies and the young learner. They still have a compelling question. You have primary and secondary sources, and you also have a trade book as a primary text where you do an explicit literacy lesson. So it's kind of a way to integrate ELA and social studies in a way that still allows students to grapple with sources and questions and take informed action as their summative task on day 2. So it's kind of an interesting sort of compromise position to be in that still does what we want it to do for students and takes a lot less time. And so that might be a solution if there's a scripted social studies curriculum they have to do, or ELA, to just embed these 2-day trade book inquiries within their curriculum. There's got to be somewhere where you can kind of sub out one of the trade books that you're doing in the ELA curriculum, for example, put in a more inclusive trade book from a social studies perspective and do that trade book inquiry with an explicit literacy lesson. So that's just an idea of ways to kind of shrink that change a little bit and still be
Yeah.
able to do what we want kids to do.
Absolutely. Thank you both for sharing those ideas. I feel like those are very practical, suggestions that educators can start to use right away, no matter what the context is, right? Whether you have a little more flexibility in your curriculum or you don't, those are, steps you can take kind of as a first jump into this work. For the school leaders and administrators who are listening, how can they start to shift the culture in their schools and support teachers to engage in both hard history and critical inquiry?
One thing I
Go
would
ahead,
say
Neely,
is,
because you like live in this world, and
I know.
I'll listen and I'll react.
No worries. One thing I would say is, and I want to make clear, like I really do have empathy for people who feel like because of legislation in their states, because of legislation um, nationally even, or because of the threat of legislation nationally, that people feel like they cannot teach the whole truth to students. And that is a real predicament that some people find themselves in, including leaders and teachers. However, I would say um, part of doing this work and changing the culture is not to panic when that kind of legislation drops, or when, like in Virginia, I think Vicki, she referenced it before we started the official call, but she talked about this thing that happened in Virginia when our governor first got into office, Executive Order 1, which banned critical race theory. But and it caused a lot of people to self-censor, because that was sort of the point of it, was to get people scared and get people to censor themselves. It really didn't take any legislation to get people to censor, because they were looking at Executive Order 1 and getting panicked, and they censored on their own. But when you really scratch beneath the surface and realize the executive order only applies to the executive branch, school divisions still have power over their own curricula. It didn't change what the state could do at the state level in terms of our standards of learning either. You realize it really didn't have a whole lot of teeth. So I would say part of changing the culture for a leader is just to not panic and to make a strategic plan, engaging stakeholders along the way, including families and parents, because they're a critical component they're a critical partner to us in the work. And when they do understand what we're trying to do, they do understand the developmental science behind it, they get on board with it. And so I think bringing them into the conversations, but remaining steadfast that we are going to respect kids by telling them the whole truth. We are going to set up our inquiry units and lessons in a way that puts, the unfiltered primary sources in front of the students. I think you have to have that at the forefront, and then bring stakeholders into the conversation while not panicking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have like a couple of other things that I want to jump off of. Like Neely, I love that you brought in just like constant communication with everybody, right? We're not hiding anything. So I think that's a huge thing too. It's like, I don't know if you're hiding something, because that's when things go down, right? That's when things get bad. But if you're an admin and you're thinking about this, right? Like inquiry-based instruction really gets students engaged in their learning and constructing knowledge and arguing and writing and citing evidence and all of these things that we want students to be doing. So have your why. Why are you doing this? And then start small, right? Like start by learning together with the folks that you want to implement this with. There's so many amazing resources out there around inquiry. Like, we're really lucky that we've partnered with people that wrote the C3 framework. So John Lee, Kathy Swan, have supported us. So we've learned about inquiry. Then you learn about like, how do you make it so that you're really centering like more marginalized perspectives? And there are resources to help you with that. So Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice has a K-5 teaching hard history framework, right? It's there, it exists, and it totally breaks down how to do this like by age band, by like primary to upper elementary, right? So I don't know how to talk about slavery with kindergartners. It's okay. Somebody else has thought about that and has language for you to look at. And then another thing that I would highly suggest is once you've done some learning about what are these pieces and parts, find an inquiry that feels that's critical or as a counter narrative. We have some really great ones that you're welcome to use. One of ours is like, did our founders and founding documents protect liberty or slavery? Or there's just so many. We have so many. I don't want to spend too much time. Like, should Virginia have a state food? We partnered with the Virginia Tribal Education Consortium to learn more about that and how like colonization affected food here. But doing curriculum-based professional learning with teachers. So actually do an inquiry. What is this? How does this work? Teach about it by doing one and have teachers take on that role and actually do the thing, and then they can see the benefits and then have them unpack what are the benefits. And then of course, as teachers, because we all care about our students so much, then you start thinking about scaffolds or ways that you can make it accessible for everybody. But like doing it and living it and seeing how it actually works in practice, I think is really invaluable. And I think it will help teachers know how to then implement it better in their classroom. So starting small, doing some learning together, and trying it out are like my three kind of tips
And then
on top of all of the amazing things Neely said.
I thought of a couple other things while you were talking, Vicki. One other piece is for administrators and leaders to tell teachers, we have your back. I have your back. You can't say that
Yes.
enough to teachers. They cannot hear that enough. Fear's real, and fear can be very paralyzing. So telling teachers we have your back and really having their back is going to be really critical. I also think another creative way to begin this work is to start local. So like a lot of stakeholders, families support embedding local history within a lesson. And so start with an inquiry that tells the whole truth locally, some sort of hidden history that maybe students don't know about. And then also maybe bringing in family. If you start local, you can kind of engage with families in your school community around those local historical narratives to bring their lens into the lessons as well. So I think that's an easy way to begin, is starting local. People aren't as scared of those narratives when it's local history.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a question that's scary. I was looking for
No,
one. So like we have a friend. Did I just cut you off, Neely?
no,
Sorry.
you're good. No, go.
There's one called
Great.
like How Do the Actions of Barbara Johns Still Inspire Us Today? And she did the student walkout at the Minton Museum in Farmville during segregation. And she like how do the actions of X still inspire us today? Who's going to push back on that
Right.
question, right? Who's a local leader who is inspirational in your community that has like stood up for somebody or something, right? We all have those people. And so like you can use things that exist and think about how you can frame them for your local context.
Yeah, we even have one that's like, how can we contribute to our community? How can you contribute to your community? In that inquiry, students study a bunch of people throughout history and in the present day who have contributed to Charlottesville and Albemarle communities. And then they figure out how they want to contribute to the community. Who can, like Vicki said, like who can argue with getting kids to be positive contributors to their community? That's a really good thing that I think everyone can get behind.
Absolutely. So I think those were like so many good, tangible kind of entryways into this work, right? So whether you're an educator or a school or district leader, hopefully you can walk away with an idea that you can, start right away to implement in your school and in your work. So thank you so much. I am so grateful for your time. I'm sure we could continue on this conversation for much longer. I have a lot more questions. But I want to be respectful of both of your time. So can you tell us where can our community find your work and stay connected to you?
All right. So, if you post our article, our contact information is
Yep.
at the end of it. So that's really like our
Perfect.
emails and where we
Okay.
live, is and where we work is there.
Great.
And also like the work, you can find it. The website's linked in that article, our Reframing the Narrative website. All of our
Okay.
inquiries are published and available. Like I said, we're not hiding anything.
Yeah.
You can also look on c3teachers.org. Is it org? I think it is.
Mhm.
And that is where like Kathy Swan, S.G. Grant, and John Lee have led inquiry hubs across the whole country. And so you might even be able to find something local to you to start digging into inquiry. But yeah, we have our stuff published on there as well. So you can kind of find us there. Neely, anywhere else that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah, and on the C3 site, the Virginia hub's what you're looking for. And then also my school division's website, it's all posted there as well, because like I said, we believe in transparency for our families and all stakeholders. And so that's k12albemarle.org. You can look for Department of
Perfect.
Instruction, Social Studies, and find everything linked there as well. Feel free to take and use anything you want. We like to share all of our stuff.
We sure
That
do.
is amazing. And so, generous. And I love that, folks will be able to use the resources right away. So you're not starting from scratch. If you're walking away with ideas, you do not have to develop, your own thing 100% from the start. They've already done so much of the work and research for you. So I will link everything we just mentioned and whatever else I can find below, so everyone can, access what they need and want, and will be useful. So, Vicki and Neely, thank you so much. This conversation has been incredible. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else watching has also learned a lot. So, really appreciate your time and expertise and sharing your story and also just the work that you're doing out there in the world. It's so important.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so thrilled to be here with the Little Justice Leaders community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much. This
you.
was a fun conversation, and I appreciate